believe that this idea of giving yourself enough time and trying to reduce stress ultimately ties into the idea of setting yourself with a strong base. And what do I mean by a strong base? I mean strong practices for mental health and general wellness. For example, when I'm feeling well, centered, and focused, I can memorize thousands of PowerPoint slides verbatim, no problem. But if I'm stressed or harping on negative thoughts, I can't memorize a single line. I don't know why, but I just can't do it because my mind is too busy. So by prioritizing my physical and mental wellness, I set myself up to perform at my best and, more importantly, actually enjoy these topics that I'm so passionate about instead of just moving through them because you have to take them for a course. So it allows you to kind of really enjoy the process and what you're learning because you're in that degree for a reason. Some concrete examples of ways that I include this consistent habit of taking care of myself is I always go for walks. I prioritize exercise every day. I start my mornings with breathing as well as music. I have apps on my phone that help me with meditation and mindfulness. And I actively prioritize activities that bring me joy every single day. The other things that you want to do as part of this is to identify your triggers and then try to avoid them. But we all know that you cannot always avoid your triggers. So it's important to have a toolbox of things that you do when you get stressed to help move through them as opposed to getting completely toppled by them. As well as we had discussed before, when you have a disability, you can qualify for aid or resources from your school or your community. So it is really important to take advantage of those as well. Next slide. So far, we've talked about the importance of having a protracted timeline for your work to allow for error and creativity to come in. And we've talked about having a strong base of wellness. But now what I want to do is get into the actual day-to-day techniques that I use to tackle my work, taking advantage of my neurodiversity as well as auditory learning skills. So initially I had talked about I really struggled with school because I was always focusing on writing and reading, and those are things that I don't personally do very well. So what I needed to do was switch to auditory-based learning. So in class, the way that I'm capturing information is really more by listening. So if you can have a course that's recorded, if you can ask your teacher to record, or if they don't allow that, really just paying attention in class, maybe jotting down some keywords, making sure that you're centered and focused in your courses. Another thing that's really critical for me is layering information over time. So what I like to do is before and after my scheduled classes, I'll set maybe a short amount of time, maybe 20, 10, 30 minutes, where I'll review the material. I'll invest in doing some extra readings or some practice problems. So it's a very short amount of time, but when you do it before every class, you've invested over time a lot of hours into that class, and you can help to identify what questions or holes you have in the material. Another thing that I'm such a strong believer in is peer-based learning, like the strategic learning program that we have at Concordia, where you have a group of peers in a room that has a guided learning session where you are explaining concepts to your friends and they're explaining them back to you. Because hearing these concepts explained in a different way from someone else's mind can sometimes really help you to understand them. Because sometimes when your professor is explaining, it can be intimidating or confusing or too fast. But then when you break down that stressful environment into a peer-based learning session, it's a lot easier to digest, and I find that people often get a lot more out of that. So you can do that in an official capacity or with your friends. I also like to schedule frequent breaks in my work. I find, especially if I'm doing a writing-based task, if I go for a walk and I'm listening to music, sometimes the best way to phrase things will just occur to me as I'm walking, and I'll just note it down. So it's really important to step back and take those breaks because it can be important in terms of your actual work as well as taking care of yourself. I also love to explain things out loud because when you have to explain things out loud, it'll be very quick what you don't understand, and you will concretely identify what the gaps in your knowledge are. Sometimes when you're writing them out, it can be a bit easier to blaze through those, but I think really doing it out loud is something that's really strong for me. Another thing that I love to do every day is building habits that I associate with productivity. One thing that is strong for me is having a coffee and going to the library. There is something about having that routine and physical space that I associate with productivity. I think because I know that I'll have to leave the library at some point, I know that I have to be productive here. I need to do it now. And it helps me to kind of time bound myself in that space. Another thing that may seem kind of silly is actually setting up your desk the night before. I get very easily distracted by my phone. So if you have your to-do list, you have your computer, you have your papers that you have to read, all you have to do is sit down and just start. That can be very helpful for some people. Another thing that's important in your courses is finding patterns, because these are the kind of things that your professors are likely to test you on. So when you're just reading passively through your material, you may think, I understand this. But once you really go deeper into it and you're able to connect different topics from different chapters, that's a good sign that you've really understood it. And your teachers are likely to test you on that because they want to see that you understand at a level greater than surface. Next slide. Something that was also really important for me was that someone who struggles with reading and writing, I used to always read with a ruler and I would highlight the keywords. Something that has been amazing ever since joining these disability centers is that they have incredible resources for either applications, alternative versions of textbooks that can come in auditory format, or textbooks that comes with plugins where you can highlight things and then the audio reader would read just that section, and then you can save those sections that you've highlighted. So really kind of tailoring how you want to capture that information for yourself. Something that I do in exam settings when you can't have access to those specific readers, or you may or may not be able to, is actually rewriting questions that appear as big block format, because I have trouble reading huge blocks of text. They're very intimidating to me. I get quite stressed. So what I like to do is take out the important part of the questions, and then what I'll do is when I answer them, I just write the answer beside them. So I've shown the professor that I knew what was important, and then I directly answered them. And then these other things, such as maintaining momentum when you're writing, is just being kind to yourself when you're writing. If you can't think of something, talk out the point. If you're not sure what to say, I feel like I want to mention this thing. Just actually write that out and then come in and edit it later.